Morning, Art. Nice to see you today. Um, I am getting myself together. I have not yet sent out the reminder for today. Uh, so I'm going to do that directly, but one thing at a time here. Uh, okay. So anyway, it seems it's only the two of us right now. Uh, and it's probably because I didn't send a reminder. So uh, let me give me a couple of seconds to send a reminder here. Um, okay. If you want to, you're welcome to join me. I'll be launching this meeting in about 2 minutes. Um, Sorry for the delay, folks. Uh, I just have to get this organized since we don't seem to have many folks here. Uh, I will just send out a notice saying we have begun. Yeah, okay.
Morning.
Morning. Yep, I'm just getting started here. Um,
I laugh. I didn't. It's like Memorial Day tomorrow. I'm like, another holiday? How did? Where'd this come from?
yeah,
Too busy.
yep. Every day is a holiday, every meal is a treat.
Yep.
uh, let's see here.
Well,
Okay.
this last week's been wild on the market too. So
Yeah, you think?
it's wild in a really green plus great way for me. But it's like so many people are like, "Oh my God, whoa, whoa, whoa!" I'm like, I had my best 3 days in a row ever.
Let's see. What's going on here? Okay. Audience. Um, Here we go. Maybe this will do it. Uh, all right, I'm just gonna resend. Um, let's see what happens if I try to resend it. Replicate. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good. Edit design. Uh, just a second. Oh, they've changed everything around here. Edit design. Oh my God. I love it when these techies start changing things uh, and they don't have any thought of what it means to everybody else. So let's see here. All right. Continue.
Yeah, I've been noticing lots of different apps making it harder and harder to find out where to sign out. It's like they
Right.
want you to sign in all the time. That's just a way to get hacked.
Yep. Okay. Send now. Okay. All right. I got it out. And so,
Did you send it before? Did
no, I didn't.
Okay.
Yesterday we had my grandson's graduation party.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
yeah, and that was kind of good. Um, but let's see, where am I now? Because it seems to have stopped on YouTube. I don't know why. Okay. Oh, maybe this is it. Okay. I am sorry for the delay, folks. We had some family business yesterday, and I did not get a notice out in a timely manner. And I've just done that. And I hope everybody can hear me now. Um, and I'm on speaker view. Okay, well, let me see if I can correct that. Uh, okay, just a minute. Yeah, that's probably right. Ah, there we go. Okay. Now I have Jordan up there with me.
Okay.
Um, and yeah. Okay. Thank you for your help, Kathy. That was a holdover from Wednesday when we had the advanced reading group here, and thank you, Dushan, for uh, telling me that you can be heard. I can be heard. Um, and let's see. I hope it's all working now.
I'm
Good
just
morning, Archiphanes. Okay. All right. We are up and running. We're running a little late, as often happens, uh, because I push too much into one body. Really. All right. So we are reading the essay by John Dorley in Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. Yeah,
there you go.
yeah. Edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. This is volume 2. And so we are going to go on. John Darley was starting to talk about the 7 Sermons of the Dead, and we will be studying those in the advanced reading group starting. Oh, I'm not sure. Either next week or the week after. This coming week or the week after. We have to decide. Okay. So in the 7 Sermons of the Dead, which is part of scrutinies in the Red Book, um, Jung is impressed by the opposites. Paradoxically, he describes them as not real in the pleroma, but as simply archetypal potential, yet very real in finite consciousness, as an expression of the potential within the pleroma. Jung cautions about a one-sided identity with one of the opposites severed from the other. For instance, beauty must always entail the ugly. Psychic strategy demands an awareness of this situation. A no, okay, psychic strategy. A knowing distance from psychic possession by any member of the opposites without inclusion of the other. In this early formulation, Jung refers to a rent in the pleroma and in finite consciousness, but refrains from emphasizing this note, which is so powerful in his late writings, and especially in his answer to Job. Here he simply affirms that the eternal rent in the pleroma, which is the source of finite consciousness, seeks resolution of its split in the finite consciousness it burrs. The fissure is healed through the mutual redemption of the divine and human in conscious time, space, and history. Um, okay, Jordan, do you want to comment on that?
I think it's just emphasis on both and instead of either or.
Yeah. Well,
And I would say
maybe we ought to refresh what the pleroma means um, and then what the opposites imply here. Do
that's
you want
actually a good
do
point. Yeah, hold on one
okay.
second.
The pleroma, see, here's the issue. We don't scientists can't say where the universe came from. Um, we know that there was a big bang, and obviously that big bang did a lot, did a whole lot. And we don't know why the Big Bang occurred or anything before it. And so somewhere out there in, I guess it would be in Gnostic thinking, they were trying to describe the all and the nothing. When before there was anything, um, there was the pleroma. And so this would be, uh, for the modern mind, it would be before the Big Bang. And then when the Big Bang occurred, a lot of things, a lot of potentialities emerged, um, and all the dualities that we have. And that was a rent, a tear in the pleroma. And I don't know. And so the pairs of opposites split apart, and we have them here with us today. And Jung was first and foremost talking about the opposites, I think, and pointing out to us that um, energy, all of our energies, come from the opposites. And so if we have the sun, we also have black holes, for example. And so black holes eat suns, and we don't know where they go after they disappear. And so go
Like
ahead.
the black hole is like the reverse of the Big Bang in a way. So, I mean, is it birthing another universe on another side, or even is the concept of a side not appropriate since we don't know what's on the other quote unquote side? I mean, is it
Right.
a distribution? Is it a placement? I mean, we don't know. So, I think even you brought up Gnosticism, and I think with the pleroma, Gnosticism looks at the pleroma as the spiritual universe as the abode of God, whereas Christianity views the pleroma as the Godhead itself. So, in a sense, Christianity kind of implies robbing people of their spirituality. They have to petition for it. They have to give offering. They have to look to it, which is kind of childish. And with Gnosticism, it's just the whole spiritual universe of which you are a part. So I think, not to bash Christianity, but I think that there's a crowd control mechanism in Christianity, whereas there's a natural crowd in Gnosticism.
Yeah.
With it
Well,
below.
I think that scientists are now agreed that the results of the Big Bang are slowing down. In other words, um, the Big Bang occurred 13.8 billion years ago, that we can tell scientifically, and everything was flying away from everything else at probably greater than the speed of light for many, many, many years. But we can only explain about 5% of the universe, and everything else is either dark matter or dark energy. Dark meaning we don't have a clue what it is.
Well, and I think that's important right there, that we don't have a clue, because I think the kind of Genesis expectation is a big blind spot. Was it in, I think it was at 1200 AD. I'm not, I don't remember. But a star went supernova, boom.
Yeah,
And it was in the night sky visibly for years. Well, is it the Big Bang as the genesis or origin of the universe, or just our galaxy? So I mean, I think that we haven't been out there, so we don't know anything but where our feet are. I mean, so I kind of have really been sifting through the inspect what you expect.
yeah. Well,
Expect.
we have a good a good a good case in point here, because Aristotle in Bottle says, quote, all our energy comes from pairs of opposites. Such a big lie. Okay, well, Aristotle and Bottle, having said that, then what is the big truth? Please tell us. Um, we'll watch for your response there.
Well, and
Um,
I would interject that there's truth to that statement if you're still locked in duality. And I don't GAF if I have both hands. I mean, it's like, because once you get past duality, past dualism, you're not apologizing for your left foot or your right foot while you're walking.
yeah,
You're experiencing, and I think that's, in a sense, like abstract expressionism. It's experiential, not intellectual. And I think a lot of people attribute. I mean, you get a New York Times art critic, 5 paragraphs of adjectives about a painting, and I just roll my eyes. Now it's not poetry anymore. It's like I feel like that's just visual beat poetry with words. It's just bouncy, bouncy.
yeah. That's the problem with all criticism, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah,
That the
look how smart I.
work of art, whatever it is, speaks for itself. Whether it's a banana that's taped to a wall, or
The guy
um,
with invisible sculpture sells for $1 million and has a certificate of authenticity. It's like,
yeah,
guarantee you it's not there. Thanks for the
right.
$1 million.
So Aristotle says some of our energy comes from pairs of opposites, not all. Okay, fair enough. And yes, as Jordan says, there is a unity of the opposites. Well, yeah, but once you go back to what I was going to say is that once you go back, and scientists now think that we're uh, slowing down the Big Bang. We're not going apart as fast as we once were, as space and time. Um, it goes back to Robert Frost's poem, Fire and Ice, where he says, some people say the earth will end in fire, some in ice. Uh, what I know of desire, uh, I, from what I know of desire, I go with those who um, point to fire, but ice is nice and will suffice. And I think the point is that either the universe is expanding and we're going to all things in the universe are going to just be um, atoms floating in space with nothing, or there's going to be a big crunch one day, billions and billions of years hence.
Well, the crunch is important action or occurrence concept there, because if I cross check my own belief of both and the unity concept, then I necessarily, the Phantom Toll Booth comes to mind. When you jump to Conclusion Island, it's really hard to get off. And so if I even stick in my conclusion of both I need to look at necessarily at the interstice, the space between, the psychic synapse, the
Yeah,
deep, I call it the midnight ocean, where you're floating in nothingness and
yeah,
with a big sky above of black nothingness. And there's the unconscious. And in doing so, the only thing that may be is and a verb to be, être in French. And it's interesting because then I don't need to explain it. And
yeah,
I think the explanation, I mean, even Aristotle in a Bottle, the title, the name, the handle there, I love it. I mean, it's like, look at the philosophical genie, but he's got it, under wraps, kept in a bottle, or
yeah,
or what's that bottle mean? I mean, it could be a bottle of wine. I don't know. But the thing is, I think inspecting the expectations, understanding that everything I say probably indicates a blind spot, and I no longer care about how brilliant, intellectual, clear I sound. I try to keep my thoughts to myself and
hmm
put out what might be useful to someone else in some kind of clear fashion, but I'm not attempting clarity. I'm just attempting, frankly, to, you know, pour my thoughts through the cheesecloth to get the mozzarella.
yeah.
And, you know,
Okay, well let's go back to Father Dowerly here. Uh, John Dowerly was a Catholic priest in Canada and also a Jungian analyst. So he's the author of this essay. Okay, so in these, and apologies to Aristotle and the bottle, but we're not going to get into quantum physics or universal physics today. Um, that is for physicists to work through, and they don't still have a clue much, much as they regret it. Okay, in these early passages, the thought of Meister Eckhart is referenced, as it is a number of times throughout his works. Jung was later to write a piece on Eckhart, which is one of his finer contributions to the full integration of the religious and psychological meaning of religious experience and expression. In this work, and throughout much of his later writing, Jung's thought is at once theological, philosophical, and psychological, without being reducible to any one of these fragmentations of mind when taken alone. Jung and Eckhart both appreciate the cyclical return of the mind to an identity with its origin and the mind's resonance with such moments of identity in life subsequent to the experience. This union of epistemic ontological, psychological, and theological truth illustrates the poverty of the contemporary scene, which is divested of a category as encompassing as is Jung's perspective in its resistance to all traditional disciplinary fragmentation into which his psychology might be forced and thus truncated. Um, Wow, that's quite a sentence here. I'm going to go back and read it one more time. The union of epistemic, ontological, psychological, and theological truth illustrates the poverty of the contemporary scene, which is divested of a category as encompassing as is Jung's perspective in its resistance to all traditional disciplinary fragmentation into which his psychology might be forced and thus truncated. You want to comment on this, Jordan?
Well, this paragraph is an exact example of that New York Times art critic. Look how many adjectives I know. Please give me a treat, Mom. Please give me praise, Dad. I mean, epistemic is, it relates to knowledge. Well, ontological is beginning, psychological is within, theological is a belief. I mean, where's the experiential? He uses these five adjectives, except he doesn't get to. I mean, my beef with quantum physics is like everyone's all enamored with another way to describe nature. Just, you got to live it.
Yeah, you
So
have to live it, you have to experience it. And we, you know,
yeah,
you're reminding me of the famous joke about consultants because as you think about it, an art critic is nothing but a consultant who's telling you what to think about a perspective of art.
right.
And
Well,
so the joke about the consultant is a consultant is someone who knows 150 ways to make love but doesn't know any girls.
right. Yeah, there you go. And I think
Right?
my big, I think, triggered beef with this kind of paragraph that New York Times art critic, how many adjectives do you know? It's like the thesaurus of adjectives until you get to, and you never get to the point. Well, what it is part of it is a fast process with a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And it reminds me actually of what I sounded like when I spoke in groups I was previously in. You know,
Mhm.
you described it kind of benevolently as like speaking straight from the arrows, but it was just thinking out loud. And that's really not a gift to communicate to other people. That's actually wasting their time, to the point that some of them will be triggered if I even open my mouth. And I think that
Sure.
this kind of paragraph reminds me of how I grew up. This would be like, what a wonderful paragraph. Such excellent, exquisite writing. It's all in the head, and there's no intuition in it. It's all descriptive, it's all thoughtful. But the thing
Hmm.
is, it's the kind of person here, it's all in the head. Careful means cautious, but experientially, careful means full of care.
Yeah.
And I think you got to flip. So this that last sentence, he kind of builds to a. It's like watching the firework go up, except it never makes a boom. It just blows up.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Well, as one more thing, traditional disciplinary fragmentation, which means incomplete. Well, with his five, you know, logos in the head, epistemic, ontological, psychological, theological, so four, not five. Um, those are all in the thinking and the sensation functions. Even
yeah.
ontological is it's an event. Onta. I mean, you get an origin, but where's the intuition, the cause? Where's the feeling, the effect that is impending? It's like a concussion blast after an explosion. So I mean, this paragraph right here is kind of the poster child for thou dost live in your head too much, I think. And
Yeah.
it's nice, but he's picking apart Jung, and this paragraph tells me more about the author than it does about Jung.
Yeah. Okay.
So I stepped on my soapbox. So
No, that's all right.
I think this adjective stuff, this kind of descriptive, I think it's just, to me, it was such a major life lesson to stop that. Don't do that.
Right.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
And I think that I like that wound, quote unquote, is fresh and nothing I ever really want to heal. I'll just, grow from it. So
Right.
anyway,
Right. So going on. In short, in his early work, aspects of Jung's myth are already compatible with Eckhart, with some tension, while some tension remains with the total Eckhart, more fully appropriated in later works. Eckhart discerned two dimensions in divinity, between which he drew a rather stringent difference. Eckhart's God was Trinitarian and imbued with so impassioned an inner life that it was called a boletio, a boiling. In fact, so fervid was the inner boiling that it became an ebulitia, ebulitia, a boiling over. In the beginning, God boiled over. A Jungian wit might say, in the beginning, God boiled over. A Jungian wit might say, the primordial boiling over gave rise both to creation and to the fall. In creation, the existential ego realized it was removed from its source, and this removal became the motive for the drive to the recovery. The experience of a removal from from a frontal origin of life as the basis of a drive to its ever fuller reappropriation is at least partially resonant with the suffering derived from Abraxas's reign as the ruler of a world of contradiction and need to affirm one's unique self in its midst. In Jung's early myth, though profoundly paradoxical, the pleroma might well be understood as driven to express itself beyond itself in the life of each individual and creature, all of whom participate in it, and its drive to individuation in the self-affirming creature, in the self-affirming creature. Thus, the seven sermons more than hint at a primordial plenitude driven to express itself beyond itself as the basis of each individual's drive and burden to realize a measure of divine completion in one's personal completion. This theme is at the core of Jung's answer to Job. Religiously and theologically, it brings up the serious question of the necessity driving the creator to create and to seek its needful completion in the history of human consciousness.
well, another paragraph here, even, okay, creation is relatively clear, but
Yeah,
the fall, I mean, are we talking about original sin, the fall, or are we talking about the fortunate fall? Let's look at the adjective, because original sin was only created 600 years ago when Augustine used a bad Greek translation, and it is. And talk about adjectives and prepositions. He translated in that as to in whom. So instead of a natural effect and an environment in your radar, it became a personal responsibility within for all the faults. So
Yeah.
And then of course the church just jumped on that for crowd control. Before that, it was you're living your life. You're not. I mean, I'm not born a paroled felon, you know. And so I think that this paragraph is another set of adjectives that come around to there's larger than me, there's smaller than me, Atman, as well as there is me living in the space between them, the confluence of the large and the small. So,
Well, all I can say is I'm really glad I've studied Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and
oh
under,
yeah,
understand where those things are coming from too. Here, as you can see,
yeah.
I underlined almost everything in that paragraph because I said, whoa, I got to think about this some more.
Well,
Okay.
I think that glad to have studied those too, because I mean, I can pull from Debbie's references. You say the invisible or disappearing path and the otherness, which I call psychic synapse, I mean, space between. Um, it's it's what I call my shadow at noon.
Yeah.
I don't have one. Yes, I do. It's under my feet, but it's invisible. So, it's the kind of thing there where I think noon plays a trick on the mind.
Yeah.
Midnight does it as well on the consciousness, but I think otherness and the disappearing path, you make shame walk the plank. And anxiety and despair tend to be tied to its ankles, and they go over to feed the sharks. And I think people try to justify, oh, I'm so anxious. Well, you shouldn't be anxious for long, because if your life was actually in danger, you would have already acted on it. So I think a
Right.
lot of people dwell in fictions of that, where, did you have a bad day, or did you just have a bad 5 minutes and you're still milking it all day?
Yeah.
I mean, so
Well,
there's
I think there's a couple of lessons that can be taken out of this essay. One is we're not thinking big, and
right.
we as human beings don't think big enough, and especially if we limit ourselves to one perspective on what divinity is or what the Godhead um, is very limiting feature of the way people think. Um, and Jung and Eckhart apparently um, were trying to think bigger. And, because actually, who could think big enough to think God, right?
Well, that's infinity, right?
Yeah.
And
And so, just we have to get our mind around the fact that we can't think big enough. And one of the things that's attracted me to Jung for 35 years now, well, no, 38 years now, since 1987, is the fact that he thought very big and he answered a lot of my questions. Okay, so however, Eckhart also referred to a different dimension of God, namely Gottheit, or Godhead. It is into the Godhead that the ego is led to a breakthrough, Durchbruch, Durchbruch, and to an identity, a total fusion or absorption of the individual with the divine beyond distinction. The total return to this dimension of the divine lies behind Eckhart's twice repeated prayer, I pray to God to rid me of God. This is a crucial point in Jung's later work on Eckhart. It would mean at a certain point in the psyche, every individual is vested with an ontological participation in being of the divine, and that its attainment would mean unqualified identity with divinity. And Jung makes this explicit in his later essay on Eckhart. Quote, as a result of this retrograde process, the original state of identity with God is reestablished and a new potential is produced. in this line, Jung means psychic identity is a real and literal, in a real and literal sense. In the Seven Sermons, he is far less radical. Here, a moment of identity without difference is to be avoided as a form of regression dissolution destructive of one's progressive individuality and of that fullness of life that the pleroma demands of everyone. A later Jung could suggest that a moment of identity with the divine or approximation thereof is the ground of one's truest affirmation as an individual. So there you go, Jordan. Even if you talk about dignity and difference,
Yeah.
it's not enough, right?
No, it's not. And even so, back to the previous paragraph, the boiling over gave rise to basically blah, blah, blah. And then the existential ego realized it was removed from its source. It's just basically breaking water and the baby becoming conscious that it's no longer inside the mother. And I think what's interesting about that is that's also a little bit childish too, because it's not giving anything new. It's just redescribing birth with different words. And so, yeah, even dignity and difference is not enough because that's fine as an inert concept. But I can use the example at my table. I am not my client. But what happens on the table is the relationship between me and the cards and them. And then there's a space between them and the cards and me and the cards and then the whole table. And like you said, dignity and difference, that just barely even scratches the surface. So yeah, totally
Right.
correct.
Right. And
Dignity and difference.
Shuri is saying um, the entire space occupied by the angel and every devil has an angel, quotes. Jung on what he calls enantiodromia, which means to change their opposites, the grand plan in which the unconscious life of schedule is constructed in so inaccessible of our understanding. Uh,
That's interestingly phrased about enantiodromia because then there's
yeah,
a change in the opposite, but that means you've traded places with the opposite.
sure.
And instead of actually changing it, you have become it. But then that's a Christian view, the God outside, versus a Gnostic view of the God as you in
Hmm.
community, and that the whole space of inner and outer and being is divine in Gnosticism, whereas you go to church in Christianity, there's a place, a destination, which is Gnosticism is more, I wouldn't call it abstract, I'd call it nature. And then, Christian is more ideology, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
I,
all religious denominations are ideology, of
right.
course. Um,
And I think it's all everyone groping and searching and clamoring for some kind of meaning. And my whole beef with even people get all, ooey gooey, lovey dovey about quantum physics. It's just another way for people to say the word capital N nature. And
yeah.
now they made lead into gold for, point triple zero 1 nanoseconds in the, well, okay. So pyrite, something shimmered, all the glitters is in gold. Is it really gold? Was it AU gold, on the periodic table, instead of, was it PN lead? But that comes about to me from an interesting thing, turning lead into gold. There's kind of
Well,
a,
the answer is always within ourselves.
yeah,
Okay. And as soon as you start letting somebody guide you about um, what the divine means in you,
right.
Um, as soon as you let somebody guide you on what the divine means in you, you're already off the rail. You're already um, you're already living a life, somebody else's life. Let's put it that way.
Well, in regards to rent, you're in arrears. It's like that.
Right.
And it's interesting to me. It's like when you get an X-ray, you get the lead blanket, right?
Mhm.
Well, what's the magic of lead? How does it stop, rarer uranium radioactivity? Because lead is fully decomposed uranium, and
Mhm.
it's opposite. Lead is dead radioactivity, literally. So it's a coffin shield made of the same thing it's shielding.
Mhm.
And I think that's, that to me, I think is new in the last year or so, where I'm like, why
Well,
is
that's new
why is
information to me. It's interesting. Um,
yeah, I was like, why is lead so toxic? Well, because it's still radioactivity. It's just necrosis radioactivity.
yeah,
So, it's just interesting. I mean, poison is something, anything in too large of an amount.
yeah.
And
So
so,
Kathy says, not all things require change and not all adhesions require healing. Amen. Okay.
well, Kathy, that reminds me on when I do events that are pro bono, I have a little wicker basket. It says tips on top, but a sign on the front of it says, if you fear change, leave yours here. So,
Right. Uh,
yeah.
I guess the point is you're on the way when you grow out of church. Okay. If you have to
Yeah.
go hear somebody else talk about it every week, then you're living somebody else's life. You're being guided. They're guiding you to what they want you to think. And
Yeah. I
you
much
have to
prefer.
make your own judgments. Okay. And so, I suppose if the New York Times art critic says something in the New York Times, it's fine if it attracts you to come and look at the piece that they're talking about or look at the artist they're talking about and make your own decision. It's not okay to just go along with what the art critic says. And people who don't go to museums or don't go to live performances, etc., you're missing a lot. You're really missing a lot because you're being told what somebody else thinks, but not what you think.
Well, this reminds me of my sophomore year in high school, where it applies to most every philosopher, man or woman, where I would be called up to the board to write my proof out, the geometric proof, and I'd be done in like 53 steps. And
Mhm.
sometimes I just do it, ad lib, I do it as I go along. And then Mr. Boyd, I'll never forget his name. He was so funny because I didn't realize then he was having a fun time, and I thought I was being challenged. So there's wit and wisdom, the grown man versus the little boy, and I'm striving. I'm doing this geometric proof, and at the end, he'd go through and mark something out and put three more steps in between. You made too much of a leap of faith there. You have to do this, and he gets to the end. He goes, "You see, I butchered your proof." I'm like, yeah, now I have 63 steps. The back of the book has 96,
Wow.
and he would just start cackling. And at that point, the whole room went away, and it was me and him, and he'd erase it. He'd put something else up, and then I'd do it again, and he'd, cut right through it. It was like a game of tennis with geometry. And I, I don't think at the time I felt like I was on the track trying to get a sub 10.500 or a
Hmm.
sub 5 minute mile.
Yeah.
And never did. 503, 502, 503, and just I couldn't do it. But he was playing in the sandbox, and I felt challenged. So even that dignity and difference of look at the perception that I had versus the perspective that he had, but then how it flipped at the end when he would have the perception, oh, I butchered your proof, and I would have the perspective, well, I said with the powers that be in the back of the book, say 96 steps. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think that's comes back to Kathy's piece of that the changing of the other, does that necessarily magnetically change you into what the other was? Or have you changed the other like you've just recruited a Marine? I mean,
Yeah, right. Uh, uh,
so I
Sherry
think,
says stories are important from the past generations. All individuals are connected with stories. Uh, and
mhm.
Yeah, sure. And my students who are 11 to 14 years old, middle school students, they just don't like to think. I have a million stories, as you can well imagine. And they say, "Oh no, you're going to tell us another story, Mr. Conover." Yeah, not to believe it, just to think about it. Okay. As briefly noted, an added powerful and paradoxical player in the drive to individuality is Abraxas, variously described as the divinity beyond the opposites, and yet as their source and the ruler of their inevitability within this world. A condensation of Jung's attitude toward Abraxas can never be fully satisfactory. Basically, Jung would urge the individual to pursue one's most individual truth in the face of Abraxas and the suffering of the contradictions he imposes on every finite life. In the face of the inescapable conflicts, Abraxas lays on the individual of infinitude. Um, One must bow to him, but never at the cost of abandoning one's deepest individual truth and the singularity of life it demands. Neither flight nor capitulation is acceptable. Jung suggests that the price Jesus paid in his oppositional subjugation to Abraxas demonstrates the latter's cruelty, and yet in the end, Jesus has distilled the situation into the beauty of suffering. You want to?
That's well, Abraxas is the larger than large that contains the capital A all, which then brings in the lowercase a Atman, and um, this right here is telling a condensation of Jung's attitude towards Abraxas can never be fully satisfactory. And case in point, um, epistemic, ontological, philosophical, psychological. I mean, the whole look at the reductionism. I mean, that's like studying the precipitate in a filter in the chemistry lab
Mm-hmm.
instead of what you filtered. Well, so to me, it's the model of gold panning. I don't reason with the alluvium. I don't even think about infinity in a grain of sand. I pick out the nuggets. I pick out the rubies, the garnets, the ammonites, whatever cool stones, and I toss the rest back to the river. And so it's interesting. They're gold nuggets in this paragraph. a condensation of Jung's attitude towards the practice can never be fully satisfactory. And then neither flight nor capitulation is acceptable. So you can't avoid, you can't leave, you can't give in. So the Jung's price Jesus paid in his oppositional subjugation to Abraxas, that to me is kind of a non sequitur.
Yeah.
It comes out of nowhere, and I think though that it also may be the gold nugget here that has no relation to anything else in the paragraph.
Right.
Can I share?
Yeah, and
Good morning.
good morning. As the right time arises, Jordan, would you read the next paragraph, which begins the Christian dead? I'm going to take a moment here.
Sure. Anela, you had a comment?
Yes, I wanted to share my experience actually. So I remember when I was a little girl and I used to go to the mosque with my grandma, who's suffering with very severe dementia right now, so she can't remember much. But I remember when we used to go to the mosque together in Queens, and there was just something about this subliminal space with all these different shapes and patterns, these little Arab symmetries, and you know how everything is measured so articulately to precisely match each other, you know, with the little patterns. And everything was just a pattern. Everything in there was a pattern. We were all sitting and standing. Everything was synchronized. We were sitting and standing all at the same time. And I tried to understand how, like in a church, people, in some churches actually, people talk or people dance and sing, and it's sometimes it's harmonious and sometimes it's not. And I guess in Judaism it's kind of similar as in Islam, where everything is synchronized and in a pattern. And one day when I got older and I just started praying at home, because my grandmother was too sick and disabled to go to the mosque with me. And my cousin one day, he told me, you know, I want to ask you if you want to go to the mosque, but I don't feel Muslim anymore. And by the way, mind you, his name is Islam. And I don't know why his parents named him Islam, but they did. And he told me that every time he goes there, he just sits on the floor and he's looking at the wall and he's asking himself, what the hell am I doing here? And he feels like he's been waiting for the voice of God to talk to him, but it never did. And I mean, I don't want to tell people what the voice of God is, or if God has a voice, or if whatever. But he ended up in the psych ward because he found out that he had like severe psychotic schizophrenia. But then when he came out, he became like so obsessed with like neo-Nazism and everything. And it freaked me out. And I just, you know, and I saw this unveiling and I was like, well, this is the voice of God. You know, the voice of God is unfolding right in front of me, because here's my older cousin who, you know, I never really thought of him as a religious person, who suddenly was in this very nice technical college, and you know, suddenly he's looking for a voice and he can't find the voice, and then he's in a psych ward, and then he becomes, you know, politically affiliated with a monster, and all that I can remember is this what is it called? Embroidery, the one where you stitch in the little picture, right? So an embroidery in his living room that his parents bought of Abraham with his son, or with one of his sons. And I think I'm not sure if both of his sons were there. And that also kind of represents me, you know, what I was focusing on, because I can't remember if he had both of his sons or one of his sons, but he literally had like this huge machete around a goat, and he's getting ready to like slaughter the goat. And I remember coming over and looking at that picture. And so what Skip is reading to me resembles, well, why do people like Nazis, you know, who also, by the way, so many of them escaped to different parts of the world, like in the Middle East or in Asia or in Central and South America, you know, how come people didn't go after them and kill them, you know, after everything that they did, you know, all the atrocities that they did to people, like surgeries without anesthesia, without consent, like everything that they've done, you know, how could we let people like that be around, you know? And that's just wishful thinking, you know, that's very Disney World thinking, because the reality is that sometimes life kind of is survival of the fittest, but it's really not. But at the end of the day, it kind of is, because it's people like me versus people like my cousin, you know, people who want to be extremists, people who want to impose these kind of worldviews where I don't hear the voice of God. Whereas in the Quran, from my understanding, if anyone's ever had the opportunity to, you know, borrow it from the library, if you're not a fan of Islam, not everyone is, you know, but my favorite chapter is the one about the bees, because it tells you how bees work together, and at the same time it also tells you how not in the text itself, but if you think about it, sometimes the bees kill their queen, right? They kill their queen. So, you know, so there's also that part of the story where you have to interpret that people can love you so very much, but those same people who love you very much can also bring you down to your death, you know? So, and I think that's what religious texts are. They're there for reference of deeper thinking, like existential thinking, for people who are very spiritual, and maybe you know, Christianity or the Quran is not enough. Maybe the King James Bible is not enough. Maybe the Mormon Bible is enough. You know, who knows? And I've read some of the Mormon Bible. It's very interesting because they actually introduced Native Americans in there, which I thought was very interesting. But you know, everyone has their concept and their version of God, whatever it is. And for me, the way that I interpret Islam is an art, is sort of like my Buddhism, because I've had Buddhist and Sikh influences in my life. So when I look at it, and many other religions, and so when I look at it from my environment, from my nature, and how I interpret all of this is that it's nature, you know, because they talk a lot about animals. And when you read something like Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, it makes you think about what it means to fast, what it means to discipline your body and your mind, to refrain yourself from desires, right? So for everyone it's different, but I feel that in a sense it's kind of like an existential reference, if you will.
Well, it's interesting there, especially with the fasting part, because some people fast and they suffer. Some people fast and it's just cleaning the filter. I mean, if you eat enough meat-based protein, you go for 2-3 days and just drink water, you're fine. You're not suffering through a time. You're not causing. I feel a cat of nine tails, slapping yourself on the back with this thing that hurts. There's no reason for that immolation, that self-harm. And you remind me there of the quote, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And my interpretation of that is that, well, your enemies can't betray you. There's no trust relationship. Only people close to you who you trust and love can betray you. So when you see that inner circle of enemies open up, incoming, someone's coming in. And so you can use those opposites as your radar and then see which friends are actually not there for friendship, but there for taking. So I think the difference between you and your cousin, he has that, he's bouncing against the poles, one extreme to the other, but he's not birthing out of that into who he is. It reminds me of the movie Man Facing Southeast. The guy goes crazy and he hurts a lot of people and they put him back in the insane asylum. And then he stands all day and he stands and faces southeast and he just stares, not at the wall like your cousin, just out into nothingness. And then he starts to paint. And the police officer at one point, who's in and out of the psych ward, the police officer, the chief, goes to the warden and says, how do you know when to let him out? He goes, oh, that's easy. His art goes to shit. He's ready for society. So he goes back out. He's, conforming. And then he starts to not conform and gets put back in. So it's almost like he's getting, criminalized so he can go back and paint. And, it's an interesting back and forth to not get locked in the either or. Don't bounce on the pendulum edges. Be the pendulum. I mean, the pendulum might even not know it's moving. So, I mean, I appreciate your example with you and your cousin, because that's quite a story with him.
Well, I just want to comment on one thing that's out here in the YouTube where Archimedes puts an equivalency, pseudo-history equals Mormonism. And I would say that that's somewhat of an error, because Mormonism is in fact history and part of the history of the human race.
Well,
and
yeah, anyone using pseudo history, pseudo science means that's telling you about their belief system. I mean, my dad used to call Gnosticism a pseudoscience, tarot a pseudoscience, astrology a pseudoscience. I don't think the word science needs to apply to anything except science. And, I think what's interesting is when people say trust the science, that's propaganda. You never
and
science is always changing and finding new facts and discovering. Science itself is not about trusting anything. It's about discovery.
right. And we have to examine ourselves, I think, because Mormonism has produced a lot of great things. It has produced this website about your genealogy, and
And it's not it's their history. It's not pseudo history. It's their history.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Marie and Donny Osmond in the 70s or whatever. I mean, so where are the gold nuggets? So I think calling Mormonism some kind of pseudo history perpetuates the us versus them, and reminds me of James Hillman's title, A Terrible Love of War.
Yeah.
Got to have conflict. And Then they go blame the conflict, and then they blame each other. And it's almost like they start a war so they can keep blaming bigger. But like you said, self-examine. And now I don't self-examine. I just am. And I'll notice triggers, I'll notice patterns, and it's fine. Nothing to be ashamed of. Just navigate. And so I think what's interesting, the pseudo again is another adjective, history.
Yeah.
Why isn't it her story? It's
Yeah.
his story.
Right.
So, I mean, I think we have to be careful with descriptions, because there's an innate bias towards conflict in a lot of cases, which I find to be juvenile, honestly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. You haven't read this chat paragraph yet,
No,
Jordan?
Amel was giving us that good story about her and her cousin, so I can read it now.
Yeah. You can go ahead.
The Christian dead to whom these words are addressed rightly perceive that their perception of a wholly transcendent and self-sufficient divinity is being undermined, and take great umbrage with such a view, even though they themselves and their age have outgrown such a divinity into a maturity that believes only what it can experience at a lesser level. Nonetheless, Philemon / Jung refuses to placate them with a simple replacement of what they have already outgrown. Rather, the preacher proclaims that God is not dead. In quotes, he is as alive as ever. But his life is far different from the life of any God the Christians have understood. In effect, God is manifest in every creature. Jung / Philemon is proposing a universal sacramentality in which every existent participates in the pleroma as its expression, and humanity can and should become aware of it. In later works, Jung will identify the opposites in the pleroma and in their expression, moving to integration in human consciousness. But in this early work, he speaks less of the union of opposites and insists more on a simple awareness of their reality. In fact, he cautions against a too superficial, perhaps too rational, love that, bringing together of Christ and Satan. There, more than intellectual truth is in a quote unquote medium, a more than intellectual coming together. Later, Jung seems to have come to an incipient realization that the opposites not only have to be recognized and acknowledged, but that the deeper movement of the psyche is to bring them together. In his essay on the Trinity, he strongly suggests that the light and the dark sons of the same Father, Christ and Satan, would move to an embrace or resolution in the psyche and so in history. Already in his Red Book, he is signaling that this unity is not a work of reason, but that of a mediator who unites opposites through a transrational process comparable to a new insight funded by the psyche, like a new revelation. Which, that makes the psyche the confluence, the place between spirit and soul, where we live, where, the whole baseline of your feet on the ground, the soul underneath and the spirit above, and you have both.
Yeah, we are the conjunction of opposites. There's never going to be a resolution of those. And that's what we work with. And
right there, that's what we work with.
Yeah. And, Well, I suppose, not many people understand my art. Okay. Um, and the truth is, there's nothing there to understand.
Right.
Right.
You just experience it, and
Right.
that beauty is
Right. And I'm not trying to make them understand anything about it. As I do it each day and I'm moving my brush through another color of paint, um, it doesn't have any meaning to me as such on the page. Um, it has meaning to me in the process. And in fact, I'm doing a piece right now that I really don't like or didn't like at one point because I made the mistake of using both black and brown, something I never do, in this piece. And um,
brown brown, or did you mix brown?
no, I used a watercolor pigment that was brown and a watercolor pigment that's black. I didn't mix them. And I absolutely hated it. Okay. And I realized, whoa, I don't want to do this. And so I ended up coloring it over with blue. But in the process of getting there, I mean, at one point I was thinking of, geez, I'm going to pull this piece off my pad and destroy it. And my psyche said to me in very clear words, um, trust the process. And so I've kept going, but I also obliterated the black and the brown. I just, those do not represent what I'm doing in my painting. Okay. And that was the decision made that they do not represent what I want to put out on the page.
It's interesting about the brown because when I was painting in oils in the early 90s, I remember using brown from a tube, and as soon as it touched the canvas, I stopped and I kind of threw up a little bit in my mouth. And like, ooh, it was that ugly. And this whole histrionics of, the both and black and the white and the opposites, Christ and Satan, etc. I quickly realized it was because someone else mixed the brown. Somehow it didn't come out of the ground. And then that perplexed me because I'm like, well, the earth is brown. And then I'm like, why is it such living red earth in New Mexico versus pale, pastelly, washed out, chalky brown in North Texas?
Mhm.
Now, unless you amend the soil with potting soil, etc. But right then I went, oh, go to another canvas. Let's learn brown. And what I realized is that if I mixed yellow and purple, I got a chalky brown. If I mixed orange or Chinese vermilion with indigo, I got a rich red earth living brown. And the chalky felt dead, and the other one felt, and I went back to the canvas and, scraped off that piece enough to cover it with a Chinese vermilion, orange, and indigo mixed brown, and just kept going.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you're like, oh, I don't use brown and black. I hit that same speed bump. And I think that's interesting you brought it up. I haven't thought about that experience since then. But in a sense, what was I doing? New York Times art critic pulling brown apart. I mean, so I'm guilty of my own, I had to admonish myself for it.
Well, we all do it. And
Yeah.
What I've found by what I've been doing in the mornings, and I've only been doing it for a year and a half, but somehow big thoughts come through me um, in some way. For example, somehow fact that I had prostate cancer in February of 21, uh, I I invited myself to Tim Holmes' studio in Montana, which is more than 2,000 miles away from me, um, so that he could paint my portrait. And one thing led to another, and that caused me to um, get to Colleen Kibert and uh, what she is doing in art, and especially with the unconscious and through abstract art and so on, which Tim, although Tim's work is sometimes abstract, it's not nothing like hers. Hers
Mhm.
is truly abstract.
Mhm.
Um, Tim usually has an object in his art, and by going through Colleen, it came to me to do what I'm doing now, and and seeing that the whole purpose of it is not, am I going to be a great artist? Are people going to covet my paintings? Um, or, can I sell it for $1.350? And and the answer is I actually don't care one hoot about that. I only care about doing the process. And yes, I sometimes show something that emerged from my painting, um, on this channel and other places around. Um, but I actually do not care whether anybody likes it or not. I like the process. I like what I'm doing. The process, that's me. Um, and uh, and I've now recognized that that everybody will look at that art, and I suppose it's true of all art that everybody looks at all art differently, right? And so every nobody can see by looking at what I do abstractly, nobody can see what is in my mind, both consciously and unconsciously, as I'm putting paint, brush to the medium and putting it on the paper. Nobody can see that, but what they see is what's in them,
Mhm.
and that's what makes it interesting that these paintings that I'm doing are self-portraits in a way. They're portraits of my internal process, and yet nobody can ever see that. Nobody can ever see that or understand it. But they can look at these pieces and see themselves, see their own unconscious. And that's an important insight, it seems to me.
I think it is. And I mean, your art, Tim's art, Colleen's art, one thing I like about all three of them that I can find as a commonality is that when I look at it, my eyes, I just wander. I take a road trip with my eyes, I experience it, and I don't psychologize it. I mean, Tim often has a boat in a stormy sea. You
Yeah.
and Colleen paint the sea, are the sea. That doesn't mean Tim is fractured, but the the personality piece of how is the Once Upon a Time art story. There's no the end, but interestingly, a lot of paintings I see, there's the I psychologize them or I laugh. I remember Colleen saying, God help the artist with a gimmick. When I see someone repeating and repeating and repeating, it's like, okay, it's fine for a while to practice and have versions, but then the version has to become an aversion and you birth from it into the next chapter. Um, But it's interesting, the boat in the stormy sea. It's a theme, but when I see Tim's, I know it's his. I mean, there's this kind of Van Gogh starry sky. I'd call it beat poetry visual. The rolling of the waves. And there's a natural movement that he accomplishes in his sculpture also. Same with Colleen. And you're painting with a fork. I mean, what kind of caveman calligraphy is that? Except that's awesome. I mean, I call my marketing guru Grog. It's my inner caveman. You know, what will the person who doesn't even know the ABCs think when they see this? And it's that primal piece that I think is not recovery of nature. It's being your nature. You're navigating. You're experiencing. I mean, I used to tell people that my oil paintings weren't worth a penny. If you want something worth something, you should have come videoed me while I did it, because it's the experiential that made the expressionist. But the sound of the acoustics of the tuning my canvases almost to a D. There was this whoa 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 when I was pulling, beat on the canvas. It was like making a square or rectangular drum. And honestly, making the canvas was probably more valuable than actually doing the painting. So there's this whole heartbeat of the soul. What's the sound? What's the experience? And like you said, nothing to understand. It's just a hallmark, like a photograph is a pinpoint. There's no past, there's no future. It's a freeze frame that's somehow alive. I mean, you look at a Ansel Adams, and you feel instead of see. I think. I laugh. I say I think, and then that makes me a hypocrite. So, and you're muted. You're muted. Skip. You're muted. There we go. Yeah.
So did everybody miss all that about Colleen? Okay. Again, a more thorough elaboration of young Philemon's reflection on the essence of humanity reveals that it may not be as wholly entrapped in finitude as some formulations would insist. That's infinitude, okay? Right. As noted, Jung is dealing with a dialectic conception of the essence of humanity as a participant in the pleroma and the pleroma in it. This aid of his understanding of essence is a strong early evidence of Jung's essentialism and pleromatic sensitivity. In the elaboration of the pleroma, there is a sense in which it does not exist, and yet it is also given the note of effectiveness. This means that archetypal potentiality drives toward its own realization. This is akin to what Jung was later to appreciate in the mystic Jacob Boehme, namely the drive of God to find manifest expression and, through it, divine self-consciousness in creation and human consciousness. Every individual becomes an expression of the pleroma. Such expression is one's truest essence. The conclusion is that each human is potentially divine, and that the process of maturation, individuation, is to move to the making of this potentiality real in the process of living life to its fullest. We will return to an elaboration of this conception in the sixth sermon, where it is related to a blue star or light grounded in the pleroma, following and leading the individual through life's journey as gently but forcefully supporting the individual's deepest truth.
Well, I would attribute the Empress card, which is like the universe, that from which all emanates, the goddess Juno, or the feminine creative principle of the mother of God, Shekinah. I mean, Juno's the mother of heaven, but not the mother of God. Shekinah is necessary for God to exist. And I think this blue star or light grounded, it's kind of like the high priestess, a fully grounded, conscious, out of body experience, aka numinous. And I think achieving those numinous states without trying to achieve them, you know, Picasso always said, inspiration will find me working. You know, you're not going to sit there and get an idea, smoke a product of hope on the couch. You know, I mean, come save me, come save me, come save me, give me an idea. You got to threaten the muse, and that's not conflict threaten. It's just you have to be working. You know, going through the.
Well, I for a long while, Joseph Campbell, throughout the 1990s, Joseph Campbell was my guru. Okay, I read everything I could find of Joseph Campbell's, and I listened to his audio tapes. And one thing happened that turned me off, and that was um, a young woman asked Joseph Campbell a question, and the question is, um, so, Dr. Campbell, what is the meaning of life? And he said in his most derisive um, New York accent, "Oh, there's no meaning of life. There's just an experience of life." Um, and that turned me right off. And the reason is that, yeah, there's no meaning of life. But on the other hand, there is a meaning of your life. And um, and nobody's going to know the full extent of that until probably long after your death. And
I remember very specifically right when I heard that, and I rolled my eyes and leaned forward on the couch, and it was interesting because my dad said, don't go down that path. And I looked at him and I said, oh my God, Dad, he's just not confident enough to say, I don't know. He's got this bullshit adolescent nihilism going on because he can't say, I don't know. And I've never seen Joseph Campbell ashamed, but I just saw him ashamed. And my dad's eyes went up, and I'm like, I'm not following that path. I've already been there. I'm 13. You know, it's like, I'm there right now. I should agree with it, but I don't, because I find it to be total BS. But I remember that it was so, Joseph Campbell was interesting and listenable and engaging. And right then, I saw him as annoyed. I remember it felt like, wow, it's going to be hard for him to get through high school. I mean, so it's like, but because he just wouldn't say, I don't know.
yeah, so it's like arguing um, the number of angels that reside on the head of a pin. You can never get to the end of it. And I think Andy Warhol um, kind of summed it up in one of his quotes, which was, if you want to be immortal, make something that'll last after your life, after your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, your question, how many angels? no matter what you answer, it's always going to be n minus one.
Uh, and that is because,
One fell. It's like
oh,
one
okay.
fell to make, and I think instead of, if I look at the fortunate fall instead of original sin, one fell to make the soul, to make
Yeah,
the darkness, to make the depths, to be the light in the dark. And I mean, even, Venus, the planet, one of the interpretations is, of Satan is the light bringer. Well,
right.
people don't like to use that because then they have to stop hating. And if they stop hating, they're going to have to look at themselves and deal with what they don't like about themselves. And but if you're gonna if you're gonna live, you're gonna burn.
Yeah,
Life is alive. It's and even the definition of friendship, the fire that requires no fuel. So
right.
life gives life, and like you've often said, life feeds off life. And so I think looking at not good and evil, because I think there's a lot less evil. It's easier to concentrate on it because you have something to go against. But the
Yeah,
problem is you're bracing against conflict. And if you've truly experienced someone who's malevolent, it's it's interesting at best. I mean, Jordan Peterson said some people haven't been abused; they actually stared into the eyes of evil, and they have never recovered from the experience. Um, if you watch the movie The Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins did a really good job at being that person. The way he focused and acted, his eyes were, it's not even, you can watch it without even the script or the language, watch it with no sound. You could feel, I don't want to be anywhere near that person
yeah,
because it's a black hole. I mean, you literally feel the danger you are in when you're around a person like that. And I've always, it's like death comes for us all. All you can do is smile. Death smiles at us all. All you can do is smile back.
It
And
was the Anna Wintour, the male Anna Wintour.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that um, he's now getting. I think the Blue Star Light. Now I think he's starting to get past his adjectives because when I see Juno and Shekinah basically implied there, here's the thing: I'm interpreted. So maybe I'm way off base by putting any kind of name or stories on the Blue Star Light, but again, it's what I experienced.
yeah.
So
So there's a question out on YouTube um, from Cherie, which is, what did Carl Jung have to do with the Myers-Briggs type theory? Was it in 1920? And so uh, I didn't
I,
have a real clear answer for that, but I've read it multiple times. But let me just read to you from the AI overview from the um,
I think he had nothing to do with it.
yeah.
Same with AA.
Well, not yeah. He
The
had a
mother,
little bit more to do with it than with the AA.
but the
Okay,
mother and daughter team
so
created.
let me just read what it says here. This is AI provided. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, a self-report inventory designed to identify personality preferences, was developed by Isabel Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs, based on the work of Carl Jung's theory of psychological types. The Myers-Briggs, the MBTI was inspired by Jung's ideas, but it was further developed and made more practical by Briggs and Myers. The MBTI was first published in 1962 and has been used by millions of people to understand themselves and others. And I would add to that that it's only the first three parameters in the Myers-Briggs that's based on psychological types. Those are uh, sensing and thinking, um, or no, I'm sorry. sensing and intuiting, right? Sensing being actually feeling something, and intuition coming from the psyche, uh, and thinking and feeling, and let's see, what are they now?
Well, think intuition, think feeling, thinking, sensation.
Well, sensing, S and I's, and then oh, I'm gonna have to retire here. Things that I've been studying for 40 years, I don't even remember anymore. Craig, God help
The
us.
intuition, feeling, thinking, sensation, the four psychological types, and then extroverted, introverted, um,
Yeah, extroverted, introverted, um,
intuitive,
and
and
sensing, thinking and feeling.
yeah.
Right. So sensing and intuitive, um, extroversion, introversion, and thinking and feeling. Those three came from Jung.
Oh,
What did, hmm?
and judging also the J.
Yeah, those didn't come from Jung, though.
Right,
Um,
right.
right. Judging and perceiving. And,
Yeah.
I could make an argument that perceiving comes from intuition too. But anyway, that's a short answer
Well, I
for
look at I took the Myers-Briggs at college, and I was ENFT, extroverted, intuitive, feeling, thinking. And I laugh now. If I took it, I'd probably be INFJ. What's interesting, the N and the F in the middle, the core didn't change. The E went to I, and
and
the
we do change over
yeah,
time,
went
right?
to judging,
Right.
feeling. Um, so I think it's
Yeah, the one thing I can't get by is the intuiting part, because when I take it, I keep ending up in the 99th percentile of intuition. And
yeah.
so I never see any facts.
Well, it's fun. I have a really close friend, and her intuition is facts. I mean, boom. She's crystal clear, she's concise, and she thinks things way through. Whereas to me, reasons are unreasonable, and I just pull things out of the air.
Yeah,
And in a sense, what I've learned is that um, Silence and Solitude may never be a bestseller. We'll see how long for a meme to come out, because everything we've talked about in the last 3 weeks, within 3 days, I see someone put in some, I don't know who's listening and ripping our quotes, but I always think it's kind of interesting and funny. Um, but the contrast of, for me, how to communicate with her just in conversation is this whole distilling. Only the nugget. Anything else is too much. And in a sense, I think I can kind of credit footnote her for me learning that, hearing myself thinking out loud and going, stop that. And it's interesting because, like you said, we all change.
yeah.
I'm 57
Well,
and a half, and and
what
I
I
feel
will say is that, I mean, there's a bunch of other discussion here about MBTI and whether it's nonsense or not. It doesn't matter if it's nonsense or not. Because uh, I will tell you, I mean, Jordan Peterson would tell you that you should use the five bigs or whatever it is he calls them. Um, and the point is, if you apply the Myers-Briggs in what you're doing, and I've done that for 40 years, in business especially, um,
Mhm.
I find it very helpful to understand people. And even my students in my day-to-day life. Um, right
Same with
now.
the disc profile, the DIS.
Right. And so the
Cool.
thing that I like about the Myers-Briggs is it got me started on the work of Carl Jung. That's what it did for me. And that
Well,
was because I was teaching in the graduate school of the University of Maryland, and one of my colleagues was had just gotten a PhD in psychology, and she was a beautiful woman, really beautiful woman. And I sat with her at lunch one day, and I was actually fascinated by her. My anima was acting up, and she started to explain it to me. And every day I had more questions about it. Yeah, and that gave me another excuse to have lunch with this woman. And that lasted for about 2 weeks. And I got a pretty good grounding in the Myers-Briggs at that point. I didn't take it actually, but I got a pretty good grounding in it. And then I found that there are any number of books about the Myers-Briggs. And so if you want to study Jungian psychology, I wouldn't start with the Myers-Briggs test necessarily, although it's a useful thing to start with. And there's lots of good books about it, the people types and tiger stripes and other things like that that are useful. And the more you know about it, the more it can be useful to you. And but it's like a concept in neurolinguistic programming, which says that you should mirror the person that you're talking to. And that will bring them into your conversation. And so, for example, if you see my hand going off this way, then if you made a gesture toward me, you pull up, although it's my right hand, but you're seeing it. But I'm seeing it as my left hand because it's mirrored. But in any case,
mhm.
you go up the same way as I did with my hand. If you make that same gesture,
Right.
then it's mirroring. And I read that about that, and that's more or less the only thing I remember from neurolinguistic programming. But I adopted it instantly, and I did it consciously for about a year in my work, and then I just unconsciously did it ever after. So if I'm physically in your presence, you'll probably catch me mirroring you,
What's
and I do it unconsciously, but I know it to be a good thing, and it's useful because it brings the other person closer to you unconsciously that they don't even realize it's happening.
it's interesting about that because I do the exact opposite at my table. I make sure I do not mirror them so that they are all alone in the dangerous universe and are comfortable with it because I'm not threatening.
Hmm.
And they have the companion of the images. And the concept there where the Myers-Briggs is nonsense, um, I think there's not a whole lot in the world that's nonsense except nonsense. And the thing is, the Myers-Briggs is just a tool. So do you want a
Yeah,
Phillips or a flathead screwdriver? Just because you have a hammer in your hand doesn't mean you have to go around looking for nails. You
yeah,
know, I think with the Myers-Briggs, it's important. You may relate to 4 letters, but you don't pigeonhole your personality to identify with, oh no, I'm in prison and incarcerated because I am this. All diagnoses like that's what's nonsense. You're just alive. I mean, you have 2 problems. If you're healthy, you have a huge amount of problems. It means you're alive. If
yeah,
you're not healthy, you have 1 problem. Are you going to get better? Or are you going to get worse?
yeah. So Cherie says INFJs, this is referring to the Myers-Briggs types, um, So that's introverted, intuitive feeling and judging are often described as being able to read people with an uncanny accuracy. They're deeply compassionate. I think you are that, Skip. Well, actually, I'm partially that, but I'm an INTP is my personality type. And
Well, it's like my friend is also an INFJ. And what's interesting is the fact that it's almost like twins are people born at the exact same time on the exact same day, and their astrology functions totally differently.
mhm,
Because I can look at, I'm pulling out of the magma, to make lava into new lands from nothing. And she's walking around with the periodic table of elements,
yeah,
cobbling together clarity or just being clear. And I think it's interesting about that INFJ piece with reading people. And I think what's interesting is personally, there was a radar about that.
mhm,
But I realized at one point there was also a lot of confession in that reading. And then the power of suggestion made it look like I was correct, but in reality was I wasn't really listening. And in a sense, I was only seeing myself kind of through their eyes. And that to me was actually rude. And so I try to make a distinction. That's a great point, Cherie, because I'm trying to make a distinction between, am I really just confessing and describing myself? Or am I actually accurately seeing who this person is and in motion, not just
yeah,
little snapshots, um, to experience them alive. Because as soon as I have a thought, it's probably dead in the past by a second or two.
yeah.
So how do you begin with your tarot cards, if you don't mind me asking?
I say that I stopped using spreads 10 years ago. I do something called crack the geode. The whole deck is the geode, and you crack it open, and you get the two sides to start, fan the cards, and we just take a road trip. I asked them to withhold their specifics and don't ask questions in the beginning, because if you've asked the question, you should be responsible enough to answer it. So let's take a road trip and get closer into your question to enter the question and explore the question. And my only rule, it's your reading. So at any point you're in the passenger seat, oh, that cactus is cool, turn left. I won't say why. Be like, what are we going to discover? So that's how I lead in, because then there's a comfortability with the not knowing. They get off of the result driven piece, and we try to get to an actionable heart of something that they really resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
And it also keeps me from answering right at the beginning when I honestly don't know that.
Oh, this is your spirit.
Yeah, exactly. It's your reading, not mine. So,
Yeah,
as much as possible, I try to be the chauffeur on the
yeah.
road trip. So that's how
Thank you. I want to share my painting my little watercolor painting that I've been doing with our Wednesday reading group.
Ah,
This
Oh,
was today.
cool.
I'll show you the rest of it on Wednesday when I'm done, hopefully. And I've also I'm not selling this book. I'm not getting any money from this book, but there's this really cool book, and it's about like the women of Benin, the Orisha women, and
Mm-hmm.
they're making a movie from the book, and
Mm-hmm.
they're having some prominent actresses. Look at those beautiful blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just beautiful. Aphrodite, you're beautiful too. That's my cat.
Yeah.
your painting
But-
reminds me of my favorite rock.
Oh my goodness, what is that?
It's chrysocolla.
Chrysocolla.
It has turquoise.
Oh, it's got a face on it. How are you
Yeah.
doing? It's got
Yeah,
two eyes and a
so-
smile.
It's a combination. It has the stone name is what's the green? Anyway, I'm surprised I remember the name chrysocolla. But it's a composite, and I like too. This feels like an abstract impressionist. Look at the stormy sea and the rocks,
That's beautiful.
and then it's polished on the other side. So but you're painting just that part, brown part of the top, and you're painting. It felt like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, it felt like, wow, this is the same family.
Very cool.
My son thinks it's like an aerial view of the beach.
Oh, nice.
And I also got this book from the library. It's called Crypto Jews. And I'm so interested in this book because it's about basically the Spanish expulsion and the Jewish mystics and Kabbalists who went to Central and South America to teach and North America as well to teach Kabbalah,
Mm-hmm.
which is Jewish mysticism. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's a interesting book called People of the Book, which is the Jews keeping alive. I think I wanna say the Quran, but it might be Christianity.
Talmud?
Huh?
Talmud? No. I know where you're going.
No. Anyway, I forget. It's a book. Okay,
there you go.
we're gonna call a halt here because I'm getting dull today. So
Namaste.
Yeah, we get to this point, and all of a sudden I'm like, where are the words? I don't remember that noun or that verb, and I think that's the cue to, all right, enough for now.
yeah.
Akshamaitala.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the Myers-Briggs is so deeply embedded in me since 1987. That was literally the beginning of my study of Carl Jung in 1987. And I only say that because my colleague told me that it was based on the work of Carl Jung. Okay, so I treated that as the beginning of my research into what Carl Jung was, who he was, what he was about. And it's been a journey, but I've learned a lot from it, I guess.
I would say too, on that comment about nonsense, be mindful of what you're actually saying. Because, for example, when I got into psychology about the same time as you, my dad was like, oh, beware pseudoscience. Well, he taught Greek tragedy, which is inherently, I didn't realize this till years later, that's inherently active psychology and play instead of describing the play. And
Right.
And then later I went, potato. I could learn and then when I got into astrology, I just decided mythology and the characters would teach me what I needed to know.
Yeah.
And then that was me combining pretty much Greek tragedy with tarot and psychology as astrology. And it was all then just about people.
Yeah, it is. And so anyway, we'll continue next week. So thank you everyone for